Welcome, formally. Welcome.
At first I was afraid, I was petrified, kept thinking I could never live without you by my side. But then I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong, and I grew strong, and I learned how to get along. So now you're back from outer space. I just walked
Who doesn't want to dance to that music? Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here. And as Mandy said, for me, it's a particular exciting experience to have Mandy put such an event together and ask me to participate in this program. I'm so proud of her accomplishments and the kind of person she is. And I've known her when her maiden name was, when I knew her by her maiden name, Schlegel. And so when I checked in today, I saw her parents, and I saw, oh, these are her parents. This is her maiden name. So it's been wonderful to see her develop herself into the person she is today. I also wanted to ask you at this moment I want to invite you at this moment to just take notice of how things are for you right now. Right now, sitting in this room, very nice room. We had a nice morning. How are things for you right now? And just keep that thought for just a little bit. So Mandy asked Colleen and me to talk with you a little bit about mindfulness, and we need the clicker. And so here's our mindfulness slide, very appropriate here for Lake Tahoe. So let's begin by just a show of hands. Who has heard of mindfulness other than today when it was brought up several times? So quite a few of you. That is great. So we will take the next 25 minutes or so to talk a little bit more about what mindfulness is, then what are the benefits of mindfulness, and how do you become mindful? How can you develop and cultivate your own mindfulness? So let's begin with what is mindfulness? Anybody wants to throw out a description, explanation, definition? Yeah. Being present. Okay. Anything else? Being present without judgment. I would ask you, you are present already. What do you mean, be present? Awareness. Being physically and mentally present. It is amazing how our minds constantly are trying to catch up with our body. We might be present physically, but not mentally. So one of the most prominent definitions of mindfulness is moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness. So what is awareness? Awareness means that you are present with what is happening right now. That's when I ask you, how are things for you right now? I didn't ask you, how do you feel right now? I asked you, how are things right now in this moment? Okay. Now, why non-judgmental? What do we do when we are judgmentally aware? What happens when we are judgmentally present moment awareness? How is that? What happens when that is occurring? Any thoughts on that? Judgmentally. Since you brought it up, I'm going to ask you.
I would say that if you're judging, then you're also thinking and you're not actually getting into that awareness. Your mind is actually going past, pulling on past experiences, thinking
Right, right. And our brains are hardwired, and we have medical professionals here who can explain that much better than we can. But our brains are hardwired to make judgments in terms of I like this or I don't like this. I push this away or I want to keep that. This is good, this is bad. And that has kept our species alive for thousands of years, that we can do that because we have to get away from the bad things, right? But in today's environment, there are very few things that are truly threatening to our lives, but rather they are things that perhaps we make up in our own mind as far as that they could possibly harm us. Okay, so again, the definition of mindfulness, how we think about it, is simply moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness. This is a definition based on Jon Kabat-Zinn's work. He is one of the pioneers bringing mindfulness to the Western world. He created the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. He provides training for mindfulness meditation teachers, and he created the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that Colleen and I both have been trained in to be teachers. In fact, little side note, Colleen 7 years ago was my teacher, and she brought me to mindfulness, and then I started wanting to give what I learned to others because it improved the quality of my life. I can't even describe it, and I want everybody else to have that. I probably drive my colleagues crazy at work because I talk so much about mindfulness all the time. This is another way, real quick, to think about what mindfulness is. When we are mindless, we are basically a stimulus reaction machine. There's something going on, and we react to that, automatic, knee-jerk reactions. Versus when we are mindful, we are able to create a mental space. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking a lot of time. It is an ability in how our brain operates to create some space in which we can choose how we want to respond, rather than using our predetermined automatic response to a certain stimulus or behavior or something that happens around us. We can step back figuratively and choose how we want to respond skillfully in that particular situation. All right? And we love this figure. It's so nice to demonstrate what is happening when you become mindful. So Colleen will guide us through our first little practice.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, all right. I don't even have to click a switch. So yeah, there's mindfulness is really up, particularly probably in the last couple of years. When I was working at the Center for Mindfulness, Anderson Cooper showed up one day and they did a 60-minute special. Dan Harris appeared there one time because he's done a lot of work, which will give you some recommendations about 10% happier at the end. But just so much happening in the field of mindfulness, and lots of books to read, and people probably engaged in that. But it's really different to have an experience in mindfulness. So we thought we would take an opportunity today to actually just guide a brief practice if you're up for it. So maybe just shifting to a comfortable seated position, and I'll do that myself as well. And there's nothing really special about the way that you sit, except for very often when you sit down and get comfortable and then close your eyes, the next thing that happens is sleep. So the best thing to do would be to have a nice upright position just to support wakefulness. And then if you're comfortable with it, you might just close the eyes. And for some people, they might want to just take a downward gaze, whatever's best for you. And again, nothing special about closing the eyes, except that about 80% of the information we take in is visual. So just by closing the eyes, we can eliminate a lot of the stimulus. And then maybe to begin this practice, just bringing awareness to the feet and contact with the ground. Just aware of the sensation of maybe pressure or contact. You might notice if your shoes are comfortable or uncomfortable without judgment. Maybe sensing into the chair that you're sitting on, aware of the chair supporting you. Maybe aware of the lower legs helping to support you as well. Maybe bringing awareness to the torso. Again, perhaps a sense of the chair supporting you or the muscles and the vertebrae. And then as you feel ready, we'll begin to bring our awareness to the breath. And for many people, that's most predominant at the tip of the nose, as you might be aware of the breath moving past the tip of the nose, in and out of the body. For other people, there might be more awareness of the breath as the breath moves past the back of the throat. And for others, it might be with the expansion and the contraction of the rib cage or the belly. And just knowing that we're not trying to change or to manipulate the breath. You don't need to slow it down or to change anything, but just simply to notice how is the breath. The physical experience of breathing. How do you know that you're breathing? What are the sensations that make you aware of the breath as it's happening? And as we're doing this practice with our attention on the breath, it's very likely that the mind will drift off, that it will go other places. And there's so often a kind of misconception about mindfulness that it's about clearing the mind, but that's not actually possible. The mind is a thought generator. And so each time we notice that the mind has drifted off, that it's gone somewhere else, we just simply note where the mind is, as much as we can, acknowledging, letting be, and just directing the attention right back to the experience of the breath. Just this breath, just this moment. No other way to be, no other place to be, but simply being here, now. And as we notice the breath moving in and out of the body, we might actually be able to tell a lot about how we are. Noticing if the breath is deep and full and coming from the belly. It might be more shallow and coming from the rib cage. It might be areas in our body as the breath moves through it that feel maybe relaxed or expansive. And other areas where we might notice some holding, maybe some tension. And again, there's nothing we need to change. There's no other way to be, but just simply as a way to know how are we. Very often we know what's on the mind, and this is really a way to notice how is the body. And perhaps also bringing attention to the preciousness of each breath. With each inhalation, breathing in oxygen and truly breathing in life. With each exhalation, breathing out carbon dioxide and giving life. This interdependent, interconnected relationship with ourselves and our environment. Just by doing something as simple as breathing, something we do our entire lives, we're in the process of giving and receiving something so precious. So just as you feel ready, beginning to open the eyes again if they've been closed. And so we'd love to just maybe get 1 or 2 comments. We don't have much time about what this practice was like for you today. Yes.
I feel like the thoughts in my head are a constant rushing river, and you're in the middle of that river, but I felt like I was outside of the river, kind of paying more attention to myself instead of all the things that were rushing.
Beautiful. Yeah. So the comment that, sometimes it might feel like we're kind of in the river of thoughts, that they're kind of taking over and maybe we're caught up in the middle, but then there might be this possibility to actually notice what the thoughts are, to be able to perceive and have some space around that. And that's just like that, that little stress and knee-jerk reaction versus stress and having a little bit of space, that if we're having all these thoughts that are happening kind of just underneath the surface of our awareness all the time, we end up just kind of reacting, and they actually drive a lot of where we go in our life. But if we actually have a little bit of awareness of what thoughts are arising, then we can choose which ones we want to pay attention to, which ones we want to serve us, rather than being caught up in kind of the steady stream of thoughts that are happening all the time. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else willing to share the good, the bad? Yeah. Yes, this is so true. So very often, the previous presentation set us up so well to talk about, so here's what stress does to us. So how do we actually have a choice? What can we do to actually be a part of our health and maybe even be a part of controlling stress? And this is really it, that we don't have to get caught up in it, and that we can actually, when we do meditation, it taps into that autonomic nervous system and puts us into the rest and digest. If we're in chronic stress cycle, we never come back out. So this is almost a practice of retraining your autonomic nervous system to go back into rest and digest. So it's so critical and important when we look at health. Yeah, thank you. And so I'll just put out one more comment, because somebody might be thinking it but unwilling to say it. Sometimes it's really hard to do a practice like this. Sometimes there's agitation in the body. We did a fairly short practice in here. In the classes I teach, we do 45-minute practices, and classes in business environments, I usually do 20. And so, you can figure out your own range. We know that about 20 minutes has neurological benefits, which we'll talk more about later. But the idea is, really to start to incorporate some way of adding ourselves into the circle of all of the giving that we're doing. So taking some time to really take care of ourselves. And sometimes it's not easy. There might be agitation in the body. You might have felt twitchy, or like you wanted to move, or you were going to, maybe explode sitting there for 5 minutes in stillness. And that's because we've maybe had 5 or 10 or 15 or 30 years of, living in kind of a chronic stress cycle. So it can be sometimes stressful at first to do these practices. So if that arose for you, again, we're not trying to achieve even relaxation through the practice. We're just trying to cultivate awareness in the body and in the mind, so that we have more information on how to self-regulate and what it is we need to care for ourselves.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, when Colleen said, you have a choice about the thoughts that you want to pursue and the ones that you want to let go. We talk about that thoughts are not orders and feelings are not facts. It's something that we create in our minds. I have to do this. Well, you don't. And you can do something completely different. You just need to realize that you have that choice.
Mm-hmm. So some of the benefits of mindfulness, I think we've talked just a little bit about them already. This idea of coming back into the rest and digest mode, so taking ourselves out of chronic stress, really helps reduce rumination, because rumination is a product of typically thinking about the future, which is unknown. We could, make predictions about the future, but the only moment we actually know anything about is this one. All the ideas we have about the future are ideas, thoughts, predictions. And again, Yvonne pointed to the fact that this has been really useful as a survival mechanism for our species, and it's not always skillful. So when we're stuck in the ruminating mind, not so useful. And the idea with mindfulness is that we can notice when those thoughts are moving in the rumination direction, and we can actually bring ourselves back to the present moment rather than getting kind of stuck in the future. Same thing can be with the past. Could be that we're ruminating about how things were and they're not that way now, or things were so much better then or worse then, right? So there maybe is fear that things that have happened in the past will happen in the future, but that leaning into the future or the past is really where stress lives. Because there's stress in not knowing or in reliving something that's already happened. It doesn't mean that can't, like both ends of those can't be useful to us. But again, it depends on if we're working with that skillfully and not falling into that cycle of rumination. And then with the reduction of rumination also improves worry so that we're not worried as much for the same reasons that we maybe are accepting we don't know that much about the future. And so maybe we don't get so caught there. Improves focus on now. So just like I mentioned, being able to actually move back into our body, to notice how things are in the body, to notice how we're responding to a situation that we're in the present moment, super helpful. Increases self-awareness and awareness of one's behavior and effects. So Bill and Yvonne talk about this all the time in their mindful leadership class. This is the definition, basically, of emotional intelligence, if we start to look into that. So being able to understand our own emotions and how we're working with them gives us the ability to self-regulate with other people, but also to notice what's going on for other people. So really, really helpful as far as relational things, relational qualities. Increase social awareness and empathy. We do a loving kindness practice in the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and they can actually see changes in gray matter in the brain in the area of empathy. So it's like we can actually increase our capacity to have compassion and empathy for others. Also, if you spend a lot of time in your own mind and you notice how challenging it is sometimes to hang out there, it gives you a lot more empathy for what's happening in other people's mind, right? Or maybe in their body. And then responding versus reacting. Again, turning to that diagram that we saw, rather than getting caught up in these kind of automatic knee-jerk reactions, we actually have space to have options and choose. And the thing is, if you have no awareness, mindfulness is an awareness practice. So often now it gets associated with relaxation. That's just a side effect. It's an awareness practice. And so we can all be, walking around with a lot of consciousness, knowing what's happening, knowing what we're doing, but actually having awareness, that's a totally different thing. I have a teacher who always talks about the black lab. He's like, they're conscious of everything, but their nose is leading them, right? Like from one thing to the next thing. And we can really be that way too when we're on automatic pilot. So the idea is if we add an awareness practice in, we can actually choose what things lead us and what things don't. We actually have some options and some space. So in the business environment, super helpful with communication, right? If you're really in the present moment when you're communicating with someone, you're listening to what they're saying, you're taking everything in. And I think we've all been a part of situations where maybe we weren't being listened to fully like that. We all know what that's like, and we've probably all done it to other people. And the opposite, what it's like to really feel heard, and somebody to be able to kind of regulate their emotions, not maybe interrupting or jumping in or not being compassionate to how we're feeling or what our viewpoint is. Time management can be super effective, mostly because people aren't task switching all of the time. So there's a lot of multitasking. I remember like a decade ago, the more you could multitask, the more successful people thought you were. And now we know the brain isn't even supposed to function that way. It's really inefficient. So the ability with mindfulness is to stay really focused on one thing at a time and choose where our attention goes. Judgment in decision making, ethics, and of course stress management. All really important parts of the business world and how mindfulness can help.
And for all of those items, the benefits in the business world, there is so much research coming out now, where there are very solid, rigorous, scientifically designed studies that look at the relationship between mindfulness and these outcomes. Can we really pay more attention? Are we really more empathetic listeners? Are we really behaving more ethically? And if you're thinking about it, it makes sense because you are not reacting automatically. You're actually thinking about what you're doing. I have a PhD student right now. He is doing a study on the relationship between mindfulness and aggression, whether mindfulness can intercept aggression. And he's actually collecting data from people who are in prison. Because why did they end up in prison? Oftentimes because there was no mental space. There was no choice being made. Oftentimes it was like that. And so we want to talk just a little bit more about stress management. Obviously, we had a really amazing presentation on the physiology of what happens when you are stressed. So there's not that much I want to say about that in addition, other than when we talk about the role of mindfulness in stress management, we are focusing on mental stress. And that is in the sense that when your stressor gets activated, it is because you're experiencing a threat. And that threat can be real, like in some of the examples Dr. Taylor gave, animals trying to attack you or somebody's trying to chase you. That is a physical threat, and your stress reaction is activated, which is good because now you can run faster, you're stronger, your muscles are ready. But many of the stressors that we experience that threaten us are imagined. We make things up in our head. And in our environment today, especially in the work environment, it's oftentimes social threats, like I didn't perform well enough. People are not respecting me. If I don't achieve this, I'm a failure. Those are not true things. These are things we make up in our own mind, but the effect as a threat is the same as if you were experiencing a real threat of somebody trying to attack you. So the result of the perception of the threat is the amygdala activation. And I think Colleen wants to explain how that works. And we have a very nice way of explaining it because mindfulness is used in grade school programs for social and emotional learning. Many schools have adopted mindfulness for children. So rather than us coming to it as an adult age and looking for help, kids can grow up with that. And so they have a really good way of explaining what happens when you're stressed.
Yeah, so I'll explain that. And just to, add on to Yvonne's last point, there was a study that was done on waiting for an important email response and that triggers the fight-flight mechanism. So, it's like, it could be big things in our work or lots of little things. And so you might think about your technology around that. Because there's not so many boundaries around technology. And so it's like, how often are you reacting to it? And does it go away, right? So when we're thinking about stress and stress reaction. But I didn't think about having a microphone as I was doing this.
Wait,
so
I can hold it.
Okay. So basically, we could think of my hand as and my arm as a part of the brain. So this being the lower brain here, where my wrist is. And then the mid part of our brain, I have my thumb in there, that's our amygdala, and you guys learned that's connected to the autonomic nervous system, which triggers our fight-flight response. And then the top part of our brain covers the amygdala, and this is the most, evolved part of our brain that handles self-regulation, self-discipline. And so basically what we know about mindfulness is that we make neural pathways or new connections and strengthen those neural pathways between this top, especially the top front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, and the mid part of our brain where our emotional lives are being lived. So the low brain kind of handles like all of our automatic functioning, breath, respiratory system, circulatory system, the heart. And what happens when we get activated is we flip our lid. so that the top part of the brain isn't really talking to the amygdala. The amygdala is now driving everything. This is Dr. Rick Hanson's handy brain model. And so, and what we want to do with meditation is we actually start to develop those neural pathways between the top front part of the brain and the mid part of the brain. And so what we show as space, or people describe as space, is actually happening in the brain. We're actually building these neural pathways that are physically changing so that we do have increased awareness and ability not to react automatically.
Okay. Whoa. Hang on. Yeah, we need to talk.
Okay, so this is a great study that was done. There's lots of different types of meditation. So mindfulness is one type of meditation. They all have different benefits, but this study was done to show the benefits specifically of mindfulness. So we see gray matter concentration changes in the areas in the brain involved in learning, memory processing, emotional regulation, and self-referential processing and perspective taking. So self-referential processing is how we see ourselves in relationship to the world, and then perspective taking we all know. So we actually see these benefits happen pretty much, we see them all the time in an 8-week period, but even in shorter classes where people are starting to have more emotional regulation, they're really using a lot more perspective when they're assessing situations or taking them in or responding to them, and having a better sense of ourselves, how we relate to our lives, basically.
And we are so grateful for these MRI-based studies because they are providing evidence that this is not foo-foo kind of thing, sit down and meditate and everything will be okay, but there are tangible changes that we can see. And this becomes particularly important when we do a lot of work with judges across the country. They are not inclined to sit down half an hour and meditate unless they know it does something for them. Same with our MBA students. We want to show them the scientific underpinning that the attention-focusing practices of meditation will actually result in something tangible that allows you to pay more attention. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how can you do that? There are many different ways. I would say anything from reading. For example, Jon Kabat-Zinn's first book, Full Catastrophe Living, that outlines in detail the MBSR program, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program, with exercises and even pictures and graphs on what you can do by yourself if you like, to taking a mindfulness-based stress reduction class, which is an 8-week program where you meet once a week for 2 hours. And basically, the goal of the program is to help you develop your own practice. So when you're done with the program, you go and do your own meditations on a daily basis. You become more mindful in your daily life. Okay. This is Colleen's company. If you want to talk a little about that.
So I have ongoing classes every 8 weeks that are open to the public, even though they're held up at the university. And so you don't even register through the university, but there's actually a free introductory night tomorrow night up at the Pennington Health Sciences building. And then we also offer free sitting groups. So we really have the intention to bring this forward in our community in as many ways as possible. And so there's a little schedule down there of our days and times. We teach these at Midtown Mindfulness. They're free of charge, just on a donation basis, basically to help us cover the space.
Yeah, and Midtown Mindfulness is right for where California intersects with Virginia, kind of in that corner. And it's such a great place to build community around mindfulness. And please don't feel shy about showing up like I'm teaching this Wednesday at 5:30. There are people from all walks of life. Some have never meditated. Some already have a very strong meditation practice. But it's been so nice to have different people together who all are working on being mindful and having a mindful life.
And then there's a lot of options for you that are online now. So lots of different ones. The ones I really like to recommend, Headspace has tons of really great meditations. Calm.com I don't have listed on there, but that's another pretty big meditation app. 10% Happier it's a pretty amazing program. These guys worked with Dan Harris. Their company used to do all kinds of other self-help things, and now this is all they do. And they have partnered up with one of the best teachers in the West. He's one of my favorite teachers. And they do lots of short meditation practices, but they have like a little 2-week 10-minute a day thing to kind of start you. And it's really, really well done. So I recommend that. And again, we kind of pointed to the neuroscience. We know from the neuroscience research, it takes about 20 minutes a day to really build those neural pathways. So we really encourage that if you're wanting to build a practice. And you have to think of it kind of like working out at the gym. You have to keep that practice going to keep those neural pathways kind of firing in that direction, but it can be really useful. I know that's not possible for everybody. We all have different demands in our lives. So we'll probably talk about that on the next slide. So let me point to some specific types of meditations that I see are up here. There's the body scan where we're really developing mind-body connection. Breath meditation, so again, taps into that autonomic nervous system, can help us really start to do the rest and digest. Yoga can be really beneficial, particularly with the non-judgmental, non-comparing, feeling what's happening in your body as you're doing it.
And Jon Kabat-Zinn that I mentioned earlier, 10 to 20 minutes a day might sound like, oh my God, I don't have 10 or 20 minutes. But, if you think about it, you probably do find that somewhere. He started saying, just give me 1 minute, 1 minute. And he does mean that, to just, if you can start with just being quiet for 1 minute and then go from there, it will make a big difference. Okay, and this is just a little list of readings that you have on the little flash drive that you got with the conference material today. And there's some other one of our favorite, Jon Kabat-Zinn's book, Wherever You Go, There You Are, is a much more, it's a much shorter book than the Full Catastrophe Living, but gives you some of the very important aspects of what mindfulness is all about and how you can develop mindfulness. And I just want to say one last thing about Dan Harris. Some of you may know who we are talking about. He was an anchor at Good Morning America at the morning show, and he had a panic attack on air, and he realized he needs to do something. He can't manage his stress, as you can imagine, as a journalist and being on air every day. And he started a mindfulness practice. And he's now one of the biggest supporters and speakers on mindfulness. And I wanted to bring him up because he talks about how, 50 years ago, nobody was even interested in going jogging. People would have thought if I asked, come on and run with me, what are we running away from? But now jogging is part of exercising, physical exercise. Meditation will become our mental exercise. And he also likens it to every morning we brush our teeth, right? That's dental hygiene. If we meditate every morning, mental hygiene. And so we leave you with that thought.
Maybe just the last note is, and I think Dan Harris brought it up, because a big part of what led to his anxiety was actually the trauma from being in really dangerous situations. And so we really do recognize that everybody has a different set of life experiences, and not all meditation teachers are the same. It's really, really important to find someone that's qualified and has good training so that they can help you really navigate that path successfully. And just maybe the last thing is there's lots of moments in our life where maybe we're at a stoplight or at a doctor's office or doing things like that where you might think this is such a waste of time. And that's the perfect opportunity to actually just tune in and be present to what's happening in that moment. So there's all kinds of hidden opportunities for mindfulness because time is so precious. So thank you guys so much.
You.
Really wonderful to be here.